Our first staff meeting, it was just, I kept thinking people were going to be like celebrating what a wonderful leader I was when I told them, how much freedom I was giving them. And they actually just were panicked. I mean, they were like, wait a minute, like there's no dress code. What about this? What about this? What about this? There's no vacation policy. Well, is it okay if I go this? What about if multiple people take, and they were right. I mean, I think that's the biggest lesson I learned time and again is like the best lessons I learned was always just by listening to my team. So their confusion definitely helped guide me in a different direction. But ultimately where I landed was that sort of my job to be a great leader was not to just provide complete freedom or to be really strict. It was actually to create like boundaries and expectations within which people have the freedom to be themselves.
I'm Emily Washcovick, Yelp small business expert. Behind the Review features conversations with business owners and customers who wrote one of their Yelp reviews. In our discussions, we talk about lessons they've learned that can be used by other businesses to improve their own reviews and their bottom line. This week, I'm having a one-to-one conversation with Erin Wade. Erin is a best-selling author, chef, and entrepreneur. She opened a cultishly popular restaurant called Homeroom in Oakland, California, and the heart of the restaurant was mac and cheese. Since then, she sold the restaurant, but she also wrote the book, The Mac and Cheese Millionaire, which just came out this past Tuesday, September 24th. And today, you'll get to hear the conversation I had with Erin after I gave the book a pre-read. I have to say, it's an amazing book. You definitely want to check it out. And we're going to be doing a giveaway of the book on the Yelp for Business Instagram handle in the coming weeks. So if you don't already follow Yelp for Business on Instagram, definitely go do that so you can see when the giveaway comes. Now, here's my conversation with Erin about her entrepreneurial journey and some of those lessons she learned along the way.
My name's Erin Wade, and I'm the founder of Homeroom, which is a mac and cheese restaurant in Oakland, California. And what brought me to it, I guess, the reason I'm here is I'm coming out with a book called The Mac and Cheese Millionaire, which is basically my entrepreneurial story of, leaving my life as a lawyer to open a mac and cheese restaurant that became, more successful than I could have imagined, honestly. But sort of a lot of the business lessons I learned along the way, as well as a lot of the sort of personal lessons and tools that I think other small business owners could use to benefit themselves.
And I read the book. I'm so glad that I got to get a little pre-read because I think it'll help me pull some of the lessons out, but also make people want to buy their own copy and get the full story.
Yeah.
I'm going to have you take us to the beginning origin time because an interesting parallel that I found was you were getting this all started after the huge housing crash, and so many parts of your journey to a brick and mortar looks similar to what a lot of people are struggling with in the post-pandemic environment for small business.
Mm-hmm.
So give us a little timeline context. Take us back to the 2010 and give folks an idea of what those early days were like and how you were going from just trying out, seeing if people wanted to eat your mac and cheese to actually opening a brick and mortar restaurant.
Yeah. So, the origin story of Homeroom is that I was working very unhappily as an attorney, and I came home one night having this craving for mac and cheese and realized there was no restaurant I could go to that was going to serve me delicious mac and cheese, which felt crazy to me because, Oakland's a major U.S. city. And I thought, how wild, there's restaurants dedicated to pizza, to burgers, but there's no place I could go to just for mac and cheese. So that night I went out, picked up the ingredients for my dad to make my dad's recipe of macaroni and cheese. And as I'm eating it, I'm like so happy inside and just like, oh my God, I'm just overwhelmed with how tasty it is and how good it feels. And I thought to myself, there is no mac and cheese restaurant, but I should be the person to start it. And lucky for me, I mean, it didn't feel lucky at the time, but I actually got fired from my job as a lawyer a few months after this sort of epiphany. And that was, sort of the origin. And I just decided to go for it. Yes, it was like economically a really rough time in the U.S. It was around 2010 when, the mortgage crisis had just, devastated the U.S. economy. Really big swaths of Oakland had just tons of unrented real estate. A lot of people were out of work. It was a really like desperate sort of feeling moment. But I think especially for restaurants, those are the best times to get going because, uh, especially I think for comfort food, because I think that really resonated with people. As it took about a year to build out the restaurant, and in that time, I was doing a lot of mobile events and just trying to get a sense of what speaks to people. How are we going to cook this? How should we price it? What do people like about it? What should we improve? Trying to build a following for when the restaurant opened its doors. But I think, the mood was so somber at the time that I think it was just particularly special to be able to create something that made people, just feel good inside and have sort of this shot of warmth in their day.
Absolutely. And I love when you were telling the story about one of the first times you did a pop up and you're at this cool event where lots of food vendors are, and it's almost like an underground food trying situation. People
Yeah.
come and they're like waiting to get in and buy stuff. And what I love the most about your story, I mean, you had a lot of learnings just from that first, go at it. But the one that I found so fascinating was you had priced yourself so low compared to some of the other vendors. And in hindsight, you were like, oh my gosh, how did I do it so low? But in that moment, it kind of helped you. Talk a little bit about pricing and tell us that story and kind of the evolution that you learned in the process.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, that event was so fun. It has since been stopped by the health department because I think it was blatantly illegal, but they just brought in all sorts of folks who were cooking food out of their homes and trying out their business ideas. So it was basically this sort of incubator slash nightclub, and they would, charge an entry at the door, and the vendors got to keep all their money. But, there was music. It was just this really fun, deeply energizing event. And yeah, I mean, the first time I ever did it, I had, I mean, truly crippling anxiety that I had stopped being a lawyer. I was pouring my life savings into this, concept. Like a lot of friends and family thought I was totally crazy. So I really just wanted people to buy it. So, I mean, I'd say the average price point at the event was somewhere between $8 and $10, people serving a sandwich, a plate of chicken, whatever it was. And I priced my bowls of mac and cheese at $2. I mean, which is just obscene. I mean, that makes no sense at all. But I think the goal was I really wanted no one to ever think twice about getting it. I wanted to be packed. I wanted to sell out. And yeah, it was one of those things that in hindsight was genius, because that was the point. This was not the moment to be worried about maximizing my revenue. This was the moment to get my food in as many people's hands as possible, to be generating goodwill, to be creating this sense of value that I think, pervaded Homeroom even later. And to feel like, oh my God, I'm just excited to get this, to try this, to be part of this. And I want to come back for more. And so, I do think that value in general of giving people so much more than they are anticipating is definitely, proved really critical to Homeroom's success. I think I also read about this in the book, but a lot of people think it's really just, oh, the mac and cheese is so delicious. That's the secret to your success. But, we've had a lot of copycats over the years, a lot. I mean, you can go buy our cookbook and recreate the recipes, and honestly, more than one business has. But they're not remotely as successful. And I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that. I think one is the culture that we built, which, I explain in the book, and how other businesses can do that too. But I also think we were creating much deeper value than just the food. I mean, at that time, I think this has since become more common, but in like the 2010s, what I was seeing in the restaurant landscape was really fine dining restaurants that had, great ambiance and a wonderful service experience, but at a high price premium, or sort of a low cost dining restaurant, which often had incredible food, but like fluorescent lighting, maybe like little to non-existent service, to maybe sort of surly, and so I think I had worked previously in fine dining, and I sort of brought some of those sensibilities in terms of like creating a beautiful space, really making sure that service was exceptional, so that when people get this $10 bowl of mac and cheese at the restaurant in this gorgeous environment with people who are like friendly and are making it special, that whole experience is the value. It's not just the food itself.
Absolutely. And I mean, you really curated that idea from the start. Like the mac and cheese was exciting to you and you wanted to do that, but you had dreamed up this idea of a restaurant operating differently for the team and the employees than anyone you had worked at before.
Yeah, I mean, my sort of history and background is before I had ever become a dissatisfied lawyer that decided to open a restaurant. I'd been a dissatisfied restaurant employee. So, I mean, I had worked in many restaurants, and I just found it really tough. I mean, I was earning very little money, not always being treated particularly well, and I saw no future in it. So that's why I left. I couldn't see a future in the industry. So starting Homeroom was not just about like, oh my God, I'm excited to bring my dad's, mac and cheese recipe to the world. It was also honestly my Hail Mary to fall in love with my work, because I had not previously, but it was also driven by this deep desire to create a place where other people would want to work, where they could have the experience that I had not had, of seeing a future for themselves, of really feeling like they were part of something that meant something. And honestly, I wasn't sure that I'd be able to pull that off, but I'm really proud that I did. And, it took a long time and a lot of trial and error. And honestly, the book is filled with ridiculous stories about all the mistakes I made. But that's the thing I'm most excited and proud of.
Well, and I think that's what's so amazing about this book is you're telling stories in a way that an entrepreneur could read and like write all these things down and try to implement them. But it's also just a good story. It's just
Mm.
interesting. It has, good tiebacks to like experiences in your younger years and then how that related to what you were learning as becoming a restaurateur. I just think in general, you did a great job at writing a memoir. And it's
Oh,
like a
thanks.
second best that it's also a how to business book. I mean, really.
Oh, thank you. I mean, that means a lot to me to hear, because, yeah, I mean, to be honest, like this, I mean, the way the story is structured is really, every chapter begins with really a memoir piece of, like a memory from childhood and a theme that then sort of plays out as I tell the story of building the restaurant and what happens. And when I originally wrote the book, it was much more of a traditional business how to. And I'll be honest with you, it was really boring. Like I got bored reading my own writing. And I thought to myself, why are business books, so useful, but so boring? Like this does not have to be like this. And so I rewrote one of the chapters, really infusing it with more personal narrative and more vulnerability. And I was like, oh, this is so much more fun. Like, a business story is just a good story, whether you're in business or not. And yeah, I wanted it to be like a fun, just as useful as a fun beach read for someone who's just, like wanting to like reflect on like life and meaning and, laugh, and also like a useful business tool for those that want it to use it that way.
Well, I think you definitely achieved that. I was certainly laughing when I was reading it. And as someone who's been in the industry, I mean, there was so many moments where I was reading it and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I can just picture it. I know exactly how this situation happened." But you can still
Yeah.
learn from it, like even a fully functional, well-operated business has
Hmm.
human elements to it, which causes a variety of things to happen. And so I really enjoyed it. I think I want to segue us here to some of those early days, like after you had been trying stuff
Hmm.
out at pop-ups and you found this space. Well, actually, let's talk about the space because when you were writing that whole part, I was just like, oh my God, the number of times I've heard this same exact plot line. Like, okay, you find a place, but then you had to outfit the whole thing.
I think, something I was shocked by, I didn't, for those who have not been in the industry or maybe thinking about doing this, when you rent a space, um, it, it's really like as if you moved into, an apartment that you're going to rent and it doesn't have plumbing or heating or sinks or a refrigerator, and you're expected to pay for all those things, and then if you fail you have to leave them there. I mean, it's pretty wild. So I think I did not recognize that like the system feels really unfair. Having like rented residential real estate for many years up to that point, I think the looking into commercial real estate was a real bleak wake up call that I was going to be responsible for turning this slab of concrete into something approaching a restaurant. And I think for people who've been in the industry a long time or who have maybe got, a track record of success behind them, you can get, landlords to pay for some of those things. But in general, it's usually like, oh, they'll put in a bathroom for you. I mean, these are not like, and then they're gonna, increase your rent to pay back that bathroom. So I think I was sort of shocked by what it takes to build a restaurant, and you understand things that you never thought you'd need to understand, like about, you know, electrical wiring, plumbing. I mean, all sorts of things to get this thing built. And then you like pray to God it's successful, because if not, some landlord is keeping all your investments.
Which is just wild. Okay, I also need to I'm just reading my own notes here, which is like hysterical to look back at. Your Kickstarter, you wrote here, I set my sights on raising $5,000. I wrote in the margin, LOL, Erin, $5,000.
Yeah, I know.
I just like looking at this whole thing in hindsight, like, but you were doing it. I mean, you were not going to look for a reason to not make it happen. You were just trying to figure it out. And you were kind of putting all these variable pieces together to like get it started. Tell us about the Kickstarter though, because you were like one of the first when that platform was even really a thing where restaurants were able to use it to raise money.
Yeah, to my understanding, we were the first restaurant to raise money on it. So yes, I mean, now people regularly raise, millions of dollars on Kickstarter, but it was a much more modest platform at that time. And honestly, it was really born of necessity, because I could not, despite having excellent credit, having been this upstanding lawyer, could not get a bank or an investor to save my life. So this was all of my life savings. I'd pulled all the credit I could humanly pull, and there just wasn't enough money to make these things happen. So when I heard about Kickstarter, I was like, great, this can plug some financial holes. and But it was so fun, because I think what that really brought was not just an infusion of, again, it's pretty modest, but given the budget that we had overall, that actually really did make a meaningful difference. We ended up raising about twice of what we'd hoped. It was like we raised like $10,000 on a $5,000 ask, but I think more importantly, it was like most people would donate maybe $20, and we had followers from all over the world who now felt invested in the restaurant being successful. We had multiple people who helped on Kickstarter that would also then come in and like lend their like, hard work to helping, decorate the restaurant, repaint chairs. I was really moved and touched that this project meant something to more than just me. Like other people could see the vision and really wanted to participate in it.
And I think business owners can still create that reaction nowadays, even through social media. Like, you didn't have some of those free channels to
Right.
share your story and try to get that engagement?
hmm Oh yeah, I think there's so many ways to do that today, and I think that's really fun. And actually, probably the challenge is, since we were sort of a pioneer in that regard, people weren't used to being hit up for those things. So I think they were sort of delighted, and now it's like, ugh, another. but but yeah, I think there's still fun, unique ways that you can engage people that are going to mean something to them.
Yeah. Okay, I want to transition into this period in time where you're starting to build a team and the hindsight of the whole experience is that you ended up creating this amazing culture and a culture that other businesses and brands could emulate and almost, work towards. But in the early days, you just kind of had an idea of what you wanted it to be like for people to go to work and what you wanted your team to look like. But you had a really good North Star, which was kind of this approach of romantic dating and interviewing or job dating, right? There's this
Yeah.
element of like, you maybe don't know if they're the best fit, but like, who you don't want in some of
Yeah.
those circumstances.
Yeah.
Talk to us a little bit. Tell us about what that experience was like when you were going through it and just kind of like the learnings that you have now for how to hire a good team.
Yeah, well, I do think, I mean, hiring is eerily like dating insofar as really what you're measuring is how good a conversationalist someone is. And I think just like with dating, you don't know, is this person going to be reliable? Can I count on them? Are they like a good human being? I think all you know from like sitting and having a coffee is like, are they fun to talk to? And I think it's similar and unfortunate with job interviews. And it took me a while to realize that because I would be, drawn to, charisma and a great conversation, but that's very different than, a great employee. And so, over time, really refined how we started looking for people and recognize that, oh, how can we make a job interview actually look more like the job? We would, if it was like more of a leadership role, give them an assignment and pay them to do it and just be like, can this person, how are they going to think about this thing? So I think we moved from like a conversational approach to more of a task-based approach, like seeing like, can this person do the job? But I think also as time went by and we really refined like what are our values and what kind of community are we trying to build here? I think something we did that's particularly unique in the restaurant industry is we started like hiring, training, and promoting really based on our values as well. So it wasn't just that we would see, be interviewing you for these skills. We would also be trying to suss out, hey, is this person going to be able to be a great collaborator? And then we would also evaluate based on those things. So I think, most restaurants like are going to evaluate like, hey, if you're, let's say, a line cook, are you good at banging out dishes? Are you fast? Are you accurate? And that's sort of all that matters. If you're going to get an evaluation at all, that's what it's going to be based on. And for us, we would evaluate only 25% of your yearly evaluation or whatever, 6 months, wherever it was going to be about your technical job skill. And the other 75% was actually going to be based on all these other values that we cared about. Were you seeing problems and helping solve them? Were you good at collaborating with other people? Could we rely on you? Because those things mattered. And I realized that those are the sort of soft things that a lot of businesses talk about, but then they don't necessarily hire, train, or promote on the basis of them. And that means they don't actually really care about them, you know?
It's such a good point, and it's something that you don't think about if you're just kinda doing things the way they've always been done, right? Like,
Mhm.
you had to go one layer deeper because you were motivated by what you wanted the culture to look like. I feel like we have to talk about your first open interview because even though it didn't work out so good for you because you were overly popular, when I was reading that, I was like, the concept of this actually isn't bad. Like, if
Yeah.
a restaurant is low on a couple different positions, it might be best use of their time to do an open style interview like that. So tell everyone that idea you had and of course, the funny way it turned out for you, but I think it's a good idea still, all the same.
Yeah, and to be fair, we ended up using it in later years at multiple points in time too. So it is effective, I think. But yeah, so I really, I had not ever had a management role before I opened Homeroom or a leadership role of any sort. I really had no idea what I was doing. So as we were looking to hire our first batch of employees, I just created this very utopian ad that was talking about this like beautiful, like, work culture that I was aspiring to create and just had an open call for interviews saying you didn't need to have any experience, just sort of a passion for, people and great food, and set this like 2-hour window for people to come by. And I thought it was going to be like, I'd have a tray of cookies out, we'd have a coffee, I'd talk to like 10 people. Like, I don't know what I was expecting. But then the day that it happened, like hundreds of people showed up, and which was a great problem to have, but a problem nonetheless, because I realized that in that 2-hour time window, if I spent, I basically like couldn't even spend a minute with each person. So this was just this was not gonna work. So had to give people numbers and say, we'll honor your number if you want to like go home and come back. We'll take your resume if you just don't want to put up with this. And and everyone got a 5-minute like hard stop time slot. And it still took most of the day to get through the entire line. It stretched on many, many hours beyond those initial 2. And, but honestly, some of our, some pretty big employee hiring errors were generated that day, but also some great hires that were with me for years and years, who I'd end up writing about later in the book, that were really influential. So I think it was very much in the spirit of the culture that we're trying to build, of really casting a wide net, really inviting everyone in. And we had people from just all walks of life, all different backgrounds, who we ended up hiring that day.
I love it. Okay, let's talk about the rulemaking chapter, because this is the part where I was just like, I could not stop laughing, because first of all, the way you told all the story, I could picture it the whole time, like I was in there with you guys.
Yeah.
But before I worked at Yelp, which I've been at Yelp a decade now, so this is a long time ago, when I was fresh out of college, I was a front office manager at a Marriott. And I started as an assistant, and then the front office manager got fired, and I kind of was just like doing the job because I was cheap labor pretty much.
Yeah.
But all of the little examples you were giving, I was like, that's literally how I felt all the time when I would have this idea of like, oh, I'm going to make this and they're going to love it. And they're looking at me like, you just gave me more questions than answers,
Yeah.
So give everyone a little bit of the story of kind of how you're starting the shift and training with everyone and getting them ready to go. And they're like, we need more guidance. We need more rules.
Yeah. Well, I really had this vision, like I said, of this sort of utopian, wonderful workplace, but I did not have examples of how to create such an environment, so I was really building these things from scratch. So I think what I was reacting to is the kind of workplaces many of us have been in, which is really top down, very strict. There's a lot of rules, there's punishment, and that felt very confining to me. And so I was really wanting to give people the kind of trust and freedom that I wished other employers had given to me. But I think what ended up happening is I really just replaced like one dystopia with another, which is, a work environment has like too many rules, like too much structure, no freedom, feels really bad. But what also feels really bad? One that like doesn't have rules, doesn't have structure, and where no one knows what the heck to do. And so, our first staff meeting, it was just, I kept thinking people were going to be like celebrating what a wonderful leader I was when I told them, how much freedom I was giving them. And they actually just were panicked. I mean, they were like, wait a minute, like there's no dress code. What about this? What about this? What about this? There's no vacation policy. Well, is it okay if I go this? What about if multiple people take, and they were right. I mean, I think that's the biggest lesson I learned time and again, is like the best lessons I learned was always just by listening to my team. So their confusion definitely helped guide me in a different direction. But ultimately where I landed was that sort of my job to be a great leader was not to just provide complete freedom or to be really strict. It was actually to create like boundaries and expectations within which people have the freedom to be themselves. And that's what I dedicate a lot of the book to, because I think there's really an art and a science to that. And a lot of fun, honestly, and a lot of like funny mistakes. So yeah.
Hysterical mistake. I mean, I'm sorry. I sound like I was laughing at you. I really wasn't. I was just enjoying the way you wrote this. But My utopian work rules merely added to the madness. Since no one had a uniform, guests would flag down random customers returning from the bathroom to get them water. I was just like, I could just totally picture it. It's so good. It's so good. Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, sorry, in that, like, example that you give, I guess to be, like, really explicit with what it, meant to sort of create these things. So, we ended up, for instance, with uniforms, coming up with, an actual policy, which is like, okay, the structure that we're gonna provide is like, what is necessary for safety, what is necessary to not offend people, and what is necessary to not be gross, right? Like those are really the three things. And within that, you can wear what you want. And that was great because I mean, people love being able to wear what they wanted to work. And as long as, and it was just, my job to construct the boundaries within which they could do that.
Totally. And I mean, the what to wear thing is such a prime example. And the questions they were bringing up are such a ultimate learning that you had in the end, too, which is like, you almost have to have some sort of guidelines so that there's shared language around if someone thinks something isn't appropriate or like if
Totally.
that isn't the way to approach it, you need to have the starting point of like why you're not on the same page. Before we get to
Yeah.
that part though, because go ahead, go ahead.
Sure. No, no. Yeah. I was going to say, I mean, an analogy I use is like really what you want to be doing is creating like a coloring book, not a blank page and not a paint by number, because, I think what I had been used to was a paint by number. Everyone's paint by number is going to look the same. It's like, these are the colors you need to be putting in what places. It's just going to look the same. And it feels really uninspiring to work at places where there's no differentiation, no room for your own personality or individuality, and no room to use your own mind, right? That's not fun. But likewise, it is not fun to be handed a blank page and have no idea what the heck you're supposed to do. And it's not a good business practice because if everyone is doing something different, customers are going to get different experiences, different food. Like there's no standard. So, I always think like the ideal thing to think about when you're managing people is like creating the coloring book, because a coloring book is going to have, here's the outlines, here's the picture we're all drawing together. But everyone's coloring book page is going to look different because they're going to color it differently. And so, we did that with dress code. We did that, with our service rules. Like, I think that is really the best way to create like a positive culture and also just like a fun place to be, but that is going to consistently create an experience for a guest.
And a really important thing that you learned while you were navigating all of this is no matter how chaotic the consumer experience got, because you were figuring it out and hiring new people and training people, you guys were providing this customer service and this memorable experience that was making people really enjoy it. Can
Mm-hmm.
you talk a little bit about just that whole element? In my mind, there's kind of a multi-pronged approach that you took, like using things that were made incorrectly and handing them out as free samples. That's like one surprise and delight thing that you were doing, but also just the way that each of your employees was focused on like making five people's day, that whole little
Mm-hmm.
adaptation that you had. I guess I just threw a bunch at you, but can we talk a little bit about that moment? Like you were still figuring it out and operationally it was nuts, but the customer experience was like, this place is great and they're figuring it out.
Oh, thanks. Um, so I think, we did a few things. I know you mentioned one of them, but I think I always wanted to have a focus that I think this piece was genuinely missing from a lot of restaurants on all parts of the guest experience. Like I've always felt like before you sit down, most restaurants sort of suck, like it's like you don't exist. And at, best, you're going to put your name on and you're going to sit at the bar and like, I don't know. And then once you get sat, it's like that's when the service experience begins. So I thought it was a huge opportunity that, and both from a guest standpoint, but also from a staff standpoint, in terms of looking for a fun way to engage people. So, you know, we paid a lot of attention to like who's in line and what can we do for them. And that actually was great, not just for, you know, because servers are going to be focused on their tables, but people like bussers, hosts who don't generally get as much customer interaction, like they were really encouraged to just, hey, if the kitchen messed something up, bring it to the people in line, like figure out how you're going to do something that's going to be the best part of these people's day. And I mean, it just added so much joy and to a part of the experience that's usually so crappy, honestly. And even stuff that didn't cost us anything. You know, we just bring people water or hot tea while they're waiting, and they were so grateful for these things that cost us, you know, no money. But I guess back to sort of that coloring book and how it would apply to the service experience. Um, I was trying to figure out how, you know, how could we have service standards, because I realized we couldn't, I don't want these strict ones like a large chain. I did not want scripts. But I couldn't be a total free for all, or people were just going to have really different experiences. And we ended up coming up with this thing that we called the Stoke Out rule, which a really great server and later manager came up with. This was actually someone who had walked in on that first day of interviews, because he was always, I thought, providing great service. So one day I was just like, please tell me your secret. Like, I'm trying to figure out how do we codify this somehow and train people. And he was like, you know, I'm always trying to do a great job, but realistically, I can only like do an over the top great job with maybe one table an hour, you know, and he's had like a 5-hour shift or whatever. So he's like, I try to stoke out 5 tables every shift. And what that means is that these people are going to walk away and feel like this was the best restaurant experience they've ever had. And I mean, he would just do these like over the top things that were just delightful and so fun and creative. And so we started telling servers, like, hey, this is a job expectation. You need to stoke out 5 tables every shift. But you can use your creativity. You have our full power. You can, you know, like comp the entire bill if you want, you know, like, but that's not the most creative. And we want you to, you know, think of different ways to do this. And they would. And so again, that sort of like border, the structure of the coloring book was stoke out 5 tables, but within that, people had total freedom to use their own minds and creativity.
There's so many things I want to keep talking. I'm looking at the thing like, God, we've already been talking for 35 minutes. But that's good. That's just more reason for people to go read the book themselves.
True.
I do think you had this pretty big shift here in going from being a part of the team to being the coach.
Yes.
And I think a lot of business owners struggle with that, especially, you know, the solopreneur that grows to like having 2 employees or 3. It's really, really hard to think of yourself as the coach.
Mm-hmm.
You go into it in the book of like all the things that finally pushed you into this role. But do you have any advice for entrepreneurs that really they know that they struggle with that? They're not good at being the coach. They're one of the team players.
You know, I think that my biggest piece of advice in that regard is, one, to know yourself well enough to know what you'd like to do. Because the truth is, like, I think I wanted to be the coach. That was my path. But I have a lot of friends who are in the industry who just love being on the floor every day. That's their joy. They just want to be a member of the team. They want to be a player out on the field. And I think if you know that about yourself, there's nothing wrong with it, and embrace it and enjoy it, and just know it's going to be a challenge for you to work on the business in addition to in the business, you know?
Yeah.
And I think honestly, limit your size, because that only works for so long, you know? And so for me, I think just, I recognized that I was really inhibiting like other people's development and my own development by playing in the field, like as a team member, versus sitting on the sidelines, not working shifts, and really asking myself, what does this business need to grow, to be sustainable? How do I support my teammates? How do I help coach them to be better at what they're doing and support them to be the best possible team? And you know, that was a result of us reaching a certain size. That was also a result of reaching a certain point in my own professional maturity. But I do think it's a challenging thing to do. And I would say my first piece of advice is, if that is a shift you want to make, just tell people. I mean, there's really a lot of power. I think that analogy is quite helpful. Like, to be a great coach, you have to have played, right? There's no coach that like there's no soccer coach out there that never played soccer. Like you have to have played, but at some point to be a great coach, you can't be running around on the field with everyone. And I think just explaining that to people, they get it, and then they will look at you differently, and it's just easier to hold that boundary.
I think this segues perfectly into the transparency you started to give your team to create that more bought in culture.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a part of the book, so I don't want you to like get into all the deep because everyone needs to go and like really read how you worked through this process. But I do think there's something so impactful about this change that you had. I mean,
Like, so I think, yeah, if you're going to make this transition, if you're interested in making the transition from essentially being a co-player on the field, so like working shifts, serving customers, cooking food, to working on the business, being the coach, I think I spent a lot of time figuring out how to do this. And I realized that, the most important thing is that, like, I was actually the one holding a lot of the information about the business. And there's no way that you can run a great team if they don't know how they're doing, what the measures of success are, how to influence those. And I realized that was really my goal as the coach or the leader, right? So we started teaching transparency financially and otherwise. We started teaching people about the business. We started having them participate in it. And I mean, that was just a sea change because I think most companies any of us have ever worked in, restaurant or not, it's very rare to have people share any meaningful financials, to expect you to watch certain things, to, really engage collaboratively on figuring out how to improve those. But that really made a huge difference for us.
yeah. And I think the whole transparency around numbers, it really, to my core, just brought up the reminder that in a decade of working at Yelp with small businesses, I continue to be shocked at how many businesses don't run a profit and loss sheet. Like they
Oh,
really
yeah.
don't pay attention.
Yeah.
And I think even just the pure fact of trying to get other team members bought into it is
Mhm.
kind of that personal accountability that you might not be wanting, but you need as an entrepreneur. And
Mhm.
you said in here, like every time you started paying attention to a number, you could change it. And I think that's true of any business and any profit and loss sheet.
Oh, absolutely. To that, team analogy, if you don't know what the score is, how are you going to improve it? you know, and that's all that sharing finances are about is really how are we doing? What are the numbers we're paying attention to? And how do we make them better? You know, but I
Yeah.
think there's a lot of fear in not just the restaurant industry about sharing those in all industries about, oh my God, or then are people going to ask for more money? Is it going to be chaos? And, in my experience, first of all, you don't have to share every single number under the sun. You don't share individual salary information. There's stuff that's helpful to share and there's stuff that's not. But, you know, also I think you get so much more than you're giving. When you show trust, like people tend to give it back to you.
Well, and something that you pointed out here that is, I mean, definitely true is 9 times out of 10, they're going to be shocked by the numbers and not in a way of, oh my God, this business is doing way better than I thought. It's almost like they make an assumption the other way when they don't have transparency.
Oh my God, it's true, right? Because I think in restaurants, more so than most businesses, a lot of people on the floor have some kind of clue. What are the gross revenues of this business, right? They see how much they're making their section, they can multiply it by that many others. They know what the sales are on any given night. And, if you ask most people how much of that is profit, they'd be like, oh, half of it. I mean, just they'll come up with answers that are shocking. So I think, for one, it is shocking when people realize like, oh my gosh, this is making far less money than I ever imagined. But also we're just not taught about it's interesting actually. I have kids and they're now including in like California's high school curriculum like financial planning for like the class of 2030. And I was so thrilled because I feel like it's so lacking. None of us are taught like what are profits for. And I think a lot of people feel like, oh my God, it's for, corporate giants, it's for selfish purposes. And I think even just explaining, okay, even if the profitability is this much, how much do you think the owner keeps or the investors keep? And people, again, have an assumption that it's lots of money. And I can tell you, like, that's not true when you explain, hey, profits are actually how we pay for any of our improvements, any new equipment that we buy, any new locations we open. They also are what pay for our end of year bonus. Like, it's, when you actually look at that pie, this organization can't improve or grow without this. It's not just to like line the pockets of owners, and people don't know that otherwise. So I think just explaining why profitability is really beneficial to everyone is also meaningful,
Yeah. And everyone can read the hysterical story about you walking around with tons of bags of thousands and thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And then at the end, when you do all the numbers, you figure out it was basically like a $16,000 marketing expense, but
Yeah.
a very good learning for everyone on your team. So everyone
Yeah.
can go read about that. Okay, I feel like before we get to the final topic of reviews, we have to shed some light on this amazing conversation and structure piece you built around harassment in the workplace and just
Mm.
making your place a safer place for employees to work. If you want to speak to the cultural background of the industry and why you were maybe motivated, you can. But I
Mhm.
also just kind of think that your approach as a leader and a female leader is what opened the door to your staff to be able to share with you what they were experiencing. And
Yeah.
then you just kind of sprung into action.
I think one of the things I'm most proud of, we built this culture based on, collaboration and transparency. And I think one of the greatest things to come from it is our system for dealing with sexual harassment. And, how this all got started was actually like quite unfortunate. It was like one of our team members was being harassed by a guest in a pretty appalling way. And it set off this chain reaction amongst a lot of servers that were like, hey, I've had something like that. I've had something like that. And what's embarrassing is, I had no idea. And I mean, I'm hardly like disconnected from the restaurant, but I really didn't know. And I was pretty shocked. And because we had a culture of like, hey, if there's a problem, we are going to be transparent, we're going to identify it, but we're also have this expectation that we're going to fix it together. There's no like, oh, you complain to leadership and then they fix it and then they come back with a solution. Because you know what? First of all, that's not life, right? And I was really disinterested in a culture where people in authority have power and are supposed to come up with ideas that help people with jobs that they don't have. That seems just flat out stupid to me. So I felt like if our servers were getting harassed, our servers needed to help figure out how we solve it, and so we held a number of meetings. We tried a number of things, but basically the system to emerge ended up, and I'll explain in a minute how it works, but I mean, it ended up being hugely successful for us, like really transformational. I wrote about it in the Washington Post in a piece that went viral. The EEOC ended up adopting it as a recommendation by a sexual harassment task force. It is currently used by restaurants and bars all around the world, which is really, really cool. So yeah, I'm just really proud that that's something that we came up with. And in terms of how it works, just to help other people, if you want to know, it's basically we came up with this color coded system of yellow, orange, red, and there is an automatic action that a manager needs to take when a color is reported. And so, for instance, a yellow is just a creepy vibe. So let's say a server walks to a table, just gets a bad feeling. They can go to a manager and say, hey, I have a yellow at table 2. And then it's the server's choice, whatever they want to do. If they want to have the manager take over the table, they can. If they want to just put them on notice, that's fine too. An orange is a creepy vibe plus an ambiguous comment. So let's say you come over to a table, you get sort of a gross feeling, and that person is like, oh, hey, I like your shirt. That might feel like a come on or creepy. Or if it's like a cute little kid who says that, it's not going to feel weird at all, right? So the orange would be the creepy situation, and it's ambiguous. And in that case, the manager is required to take over the table. And again, you just report the color. And a red is an overt sexual comment. So, like, you look sexy in that shirt, or touching. In that case, the manager is required to take over the table and kick out the guest. And what's so cool about this system is for one, it doesn't require people to like relive or justify some experience that they're having. They just say a color and an action happens. So it's easier for the person it's happening to. It's frankly a lot easier for the manager because they don't have to make a judgment call. And the guest doesn't even know unless they're being kicked out that this is being used on them. So I think that's also helpful. And we invented it as a way to just cope with harassment. But what was really cool about it is it actually, really stopped harassment, especially of the more severe kinds, because what we realize is that almost no one walks into a restaurant and like sticks their hand up someone's shirt. What they do is they first check them out. They lob sort of like low level comments to that, and they escalate and they escalate and they escalate. And then it gets to that sort of red zone. And so once we started moving that person out of their, line of sight and interaction at these lower levels, it just didn't escalate to the red level anymore. So anyway, we're really proud of it, and it's been really successful.
I love it. And, I think the way you all set it up is perfect for the restaurant. Like everyone could just implement it right as it is, no changes. But you could even adapt that to be for your different industry or work environment. And the big like crux of why it works is the shared language and the ability to have an internal communication where, again, like you said, no bias or decision making really needs to come into it. It's one
Mhm.
person saying, I need support or this is happening. And the other person just comes in and does their role based on, the scenario. And shared language is so helpful in a lot of ways. Like at Yelp, we use tenants sometimes so that you can articulate if we should move forward with something by saying
Mhm.
things like, is this being a smart investor? Like that's one of our tenants, right? And that's
Mhm.
shared language where now we know what we're talking about, even if we're cross departmental. And so I just love that concept that you built. And the amazing thing about it too was not only did it help decrease the harassment in the restaurant, but it also provided language to have conversations amongst the staff too. I mean, I remember one impactful story you wrote in here where the staff member wasn't trying to make another staff member uncomfortable, but they said something and that was how it was interpreted. And you were able to use that color coded language to kind of walk them through how what they said was maybe interpreted by someone else. And I was just like, this is how you know it's working when you
Yeah.
have an intention and then it
Yeah,
becomes shared language. It's amazing.
totally. Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Okay, let's talk about reviews.
Okay.
I feel like overwhelmingly what you've heard from your customers is positive, but of course there's been an evolution of the product, the restaurant, the team,
Mhm.
all of that. Has your feeling and approach to reviews changed? Do you read them all? Does someone else do that kind of stuff? Just kind of walk me through feedback. And it doesn't just have to be online reviews, it could be any sort of customer engagement or insights that you gathered along the way.
Yeah, I would say about reviews, well, it's funny about, I can say about Yelp in particular, include in the book some of the early, like, terrible reviews we got, which were justified at the time. I mean, it was really, we were not running things very well. But I mean, I do think that they are really helpful. I mean, I did reach a point where I had to have someone else aggregating them and pulling together themes because I, as like the owner, it was just too hard to actually like, no matter how many great ones I was reading, I would just feel devastated when I got to a bad one. And it was just ruining my mood and my day. And I was like, you know what? There's valuable nuggets of information that we need to learn from here, but this is too emotionally devastating for me to do. So I had someone else on my team who would like aggregate it, and we would. And that was actually one of the things. Um, that we did measure every single week. That was one of the things that we put on our report card, that we tracked, that we watched, that we would talk about the substantive, because I think they're really important. I mean, honestly, one of our goals was to get people to ideally give us a review when they're there. Uh, and try to teach people how to ask questions to like elicit negative feedback while the person's present, just because it's so much more effective to fix a bad situation for someone when they're there and build that positive relationship with them than it is to, read a bad review and send a gift card and hope to God they come back one day. So I think there's an art to that. I think people are really afraid to talk to people in person, mostly because we've all had the experience of like saying maybe you don't like something and the server doesn't care, or doesn't comp it for you, doesn't do the right thing. So I think it's scary to put yourself out there, but to the extent possible, train your team to get that feedback in person if you can.
I like that that's your perspective and experience, because a lot of people don't want to give up the aggregating and looking at the reviews, but it is to their own detriment. So I love that you found that that wasn't what you needed to do to get the insights you needed out of the reviews. And something that I love about your whole approach is you care about the customer's opinion and their reviews, but you also wanted to know what your team's reviews were. And you used to give them an option to like do the report card at the end of every shift. Can you just
Mm-hmm.
share about that and how that helped you?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't even an option. It was like a required part of their job, to be honest. I mean, really short sheets that we would expect people to fill out on a scale of 1 to 10. Would you say this was the best part of your day? What's the primary reason? What suggestions or improvements do you have for the business? How would you solve that particular problem? And, it can be an overwhelming amount of information that you're collecting, but we wanted people to be in the habit of, asking themselves, are we delivering on the promise every day? What was today like? How could tomorrow be better? And how can I participate in that? And so we would take that information, we'd use it. And if we acted on it and there was an improvement that came, we'd put it in our newsletter so people knew we were reading it, knew we were doing something. Or sometimes if we weren't going to do something, we'd say that too. Like, hey, we've been hearing a lot lately. Like, this is a suggestion for improvement. Here's why it's not going to happen, but thank you for suggesting it.
I love that. I think that's such a good communication loop with your team. Gosh, I feel like we covered so much. Is
Yeah.
there anything that you thought I was gonna, like, ask you or dig into that I didn't give you a chance to talk about?
No, you were a great interviewer. Thank you.
Helps when you read the book.
It sure
Okay,
does.
well, then let's actually have you do, like, a formal closeout where we can tell people where they can follow you, the best place to go to buy the book.
My book, The Mac and Cheese Millionaire, it's out September 24th, and you can get it in any format you enjoy at any place you enjoy buying. So whether that's Amazon, your local bookstore, I believe the audiobook comes out maybe 2 or 3 weeks after the book itself. But yeah, I hope you enjoy it. If you do, like, please reach out. You can reach me through my website, erinwade.co, or on social media. I'm the Erin Wade. So yeah, I'd love to hear from you.